I am Jewish, and I stand with the people of Palestine. I repeat, I am Jewish, and I stand with the people of Palestine. I'm also a queer Jew, clearly. And I stand with the queer people of Palestine. So as a kid, I grew up in a secular Jewish household with a mother and a grandmother that taught me about the history of Jewish radicalism, the history of Jewish resistance to discrimination. I was inspired by this history. The history of Jewish resistance to discrimination holds a very clear lesson for us today. As Jews, we should stand with Palestinians as they resist the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
Yes!
As Jews, our history should have taught us to stand with Palestinians as they resist a system of Israeli apartheid, a system reminiscent in very clear and very concrete ways of South African apartheid, a system reminiscent of Jim Crow segregation in our own country. So Jews obviously have had historically the right to resist anti-Semitism, but not at the expense of another people. Not on the backs of Palestinians. So this quarter, I'm also a teaching assistant for a class on the civil rights movement. So though often people refer to the parallels with South Africa, there are also very clear similarities between the way that Israel treats Arab Palestinians both inside Israel and in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, and the ways that white people treated black people in the Jim Crow South. In the Jim Crow South, white people, because they were born with white skin, had exclusive access to higher quality schools, to better housing and more prosperous neighborhoods, and to higher paying jobs, while African Americans, because they were born black in a racist society, were generally confined to underfunded schools, to poor housing, and segregated neighborhoods, and to lower paying, more degrading forms of work. The Israeli state, justified and excused by many in the Israeli Jewish population that have actively aligned themselves with the legacy of white supremacy and settler colonialism, treats Palestinians in similar ways.
Shame!
Because I was born Jewish, the Israeli state has given me the so-called right of return. Boo! I can return to Israel, a country I've never been to, and I can claim Israeli citizenship. Palestinian refugees have no such right. Palestinian refugees expelled from their lands when Israel was founded in 1948, and again in 1967 when Israel occupied the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, currently makes up the largest refugee population in the world. Palestinian refugees, many of whom are still living in poverty in refugee camps, are denied the right to return to land they were expelled from. And yet I, because I was born Jewish, have the so-called right of return and can choose to live anywhere in Israel that I want to. So Jewish settlers in the occupied territories, like good colonizers, have settled on some of the best land and have claimed access to water and other resources. Stephen Roberts, also Jewish, recently wrote about what he saw in the West Bank. What I witnessed in the West Bank, home to about 2.5 million Palestinians and 400,000 Israeli settlers, exceeded my worst expectations. While the world statesmen have dithered, Israel has created a system of apartheid on steroids. A horrifying prison with concrete walls as high as 26 feet, topped with body-ravaging coils of razor wire. The wall that Israel is building around the West Bank winds its way through the West Bank to envelop Jewish settlers and military bases, dividing Arab towns and families from each other. A system of military checkpoints and Jewish-only roads makes life for Arab Palestinians extremely difficult. Restrictions on the ability of Palestinians to move means that they are often cut off from basic medical services. Today, because of land grabs by Israeli settlers and the Israeli government, though they make up almost 100% of the non-settler population, Arabs have rights on only 35% of the West Bank. This is what military occupation looks like. So in the Jim Crow South, white cops and white citizens could beat and murder black people with near impunity. The same currently stands in Israel. When Jewish settlers commit violence against Palestinians, they do so with impunity. When Israel bombs the Gaza Strip to smithereens, killing about 170 people, the vast majority civilians, over 30 of whom were children, it does so with impunity and with the complete support of the U.S. government. When the Israeli Defense Forces harass, beat, and kill Palestinians who are resisting occupation, and they have the right to resist occupation, the IDF does so with impunity and with the full support of the United States government. To conclude, it's our responsibility as Jews who take inspiration from our own history of resisting discrimination to stand with the people of Palestine as they resist occupation and apartheid. As Jews in the U.S., we must not be blinded by the lies of our own government, by an allegiance to a Jewish state that was founded on the backs of another people. Like the Jews who traveled to the South to join the civil rights movement, to take a stand against white supremacy, we should be outspoken against the crimes of the Israeli government and the complicity of the U.S. government in the crimes that Israel continues to perpetuate against the people of Palestine. Israel is making a basic human desire to live life with dignity and respect impossible for Palestinians. And as Jews, the only right stand to take is to stand with the people of Palestine.
Thank you. Everyone, make some more noise for All right, so I'm